In this video, you'll learn how to create family geometry as well as control the visibility and graphic display of the geometry. You will also see how to use basic mathematical formulas to control family geometry. Once you have the framework of a family created, you can add geometry. On the Create tab, in the Forms panel, there are multiple tools to create solid geometry, and there are multiple tools to create void forms, which will cut the solid geometry. For this example, we'll use the Extrusion tool. When you activate the Solid Extrusion tool, there are multiple options in the Draw Gallery to create a shape that will be extruded. And for this example, we are working on a table family, and so we can create a rectangular tabletop using the rectangle option. So we have the reference planes already created, so we can simply snap to the 2 points on the reference planes to place a rectangle. And after I do that, you can see padlock icons. And right now they're unlocked, and I can click each one to then lock the sketch lines to the reference planes. That way, when the reference planes update, which they will do that when the parameters are changed, then it'll also update the sketch lines, which in turn update the extrusion. So right now I have all of those locked, and then I'll click Finish Edit Mode. And now we have geometry for our tabletop. Next, I will open the front elevation view, and you can see the extrusion here in elevation now, and we also have 2 other reference planes. And so in order to constrain the geometry to those reference planes, I can use the arrow controls, and I'll drag the top one up, and when I release it on that reference plane, I get another padlock icon. I can lock it, and I'll do the same thing for the bottom one, and then I'll lock it. That way we have our geometry constrained on every single side to a reference plane. That way when we update our parameters, then the geometry updates as well. For example, on the Modify tab in the Properties panel, I'll click Family Types to open the Family Types dialog, and we'll add some simple formulas to our parameters to see how they update. For example, for the width, I will enter length divided by 2, and then when I click in another field, you can see that the width changes because it's now being driven by this formula. And if I change the length to 8 feet, you can see the width changes to 4 feet, and I'll click OK. You can see that change there. I'll go back and make another change. For the length, I will enter width plus 2, and then I'll click OK. And then we'll go back and I'll change the width to 6 feet, and then click OK. And so now our length is always 2 feet longer than the width. So my point here is that you can use simple formulas to drive parameters. That way they're always obeying a specific rule that you create with the formula. All right, I'll click OK to close this dialog. And next we'll take a look at the geometry and ways to control the visibility and graphic display of the geometry. So a couple things right off the bat. Solid geometry will have a visible parameter. So when I select the extrusion, we can see in the Properties palette that it has a visible parameter. And this parameter cannot be controlled in a project, but we can associate it to a family parameter which can be controlled in a project. So I'll go back to the Family Types dialog, and I'll create a new parameter. and I'll call it tabletop visible. And then for the type of parameter, we want to set it to yes, no. That way it's either visible or not visible. And then in group parameter under, I'll change that to visibility, and then I'll click OK. And now we have a yes, no parameter that can be controlled with a checkbox. Then I'll click OK. And now if I go back to the visible parameter for my extrusion, I can click Associate Family Parameter, and then in the Associate Family Parameter dialog, we have all the parameters will appear here that are yes-no parameters. And in this case, it's just the one, so I'll select it and then click OK. And now we can control whether that tabletop is visible or not with that parameter. Additionally, I can select a form, which in this case are extrusion, and then I'll click Visibility Settings, and this opens the Family Element Visibility Settings dialog. And here we can control the view-specific display of the geometry. It's going to display in 3D views, and then we can choose whether or not it appears in plan and RCP views, front and back views, and left and right views. And then we can also control the detail levels that it is visible at. And so as you are working on families, you can get very complex with how the geometry is shown. I'll click OK and then deselect the extrusion. And next I'm going to switch to the Manage tab, and in the Settings panel I'll click Object Styles. And in the Object Styles dialog, we can create a new subcategory. I'll create a new subcategory and call it Tabletop, and then click OK. And now we have a tabletop subcategory, and then we can control the line weight, line color, line pattern, and material for that subcategory separate from the main category of the family. So I'll click OK to close that dialog, and then I'll select the tabletop. And in the Properties palette, we can control the subcategory. So I'll change it to tabletop. And now we have a separate subcategory for that specific extrusion. So once again, lots of options and lots of flexibility to be able to control the visibility and graphic display of the geometry in your family.